Nikko Jenkins has spent over 8 years on Nebraska's death row. Still awaiting a fate he has both demanded and resisted in recent court filings. In a chilling 10-day rampage, he claimed his victims as human sacrifices to the ancient Egyptian serpent god Apophis, rearranging bodies into grotesque poses and carving serpentine symbols into their flesh. But to understand how a troubled child descended into one of Omaha's most notorious spree killers, we must rewind to the violent, unstable beginnings that shaped him. Nikko Jenkins entered the world on September 16, 1986, in Denver, Colorado. But his story quickly shifted to the gritty streets of Omaha, Nebraska, where his family roots ran deep and troubled. His mother, Lori Jenkins, was just 16 when she gave birth to him, while his father, David A. McGee, was 31. Their relationship was a storm of violence. Lori later described it as filled with beatings, even while she was pregnant. Protection orders flew back and forth, painting a picture of a home where love was tangled with fear. Nikko's maternal side, the Levering family, traced back to Native American heritage on the Omaha reservation. His great-great-grandfather, Levi Levering, had been a respected tribal leader in the early 1900s, advocating for land rights and even serving as a Presbyterian commissioner. But as generations passed, that legacy crumbled under the weight of poverty, addiction, and crime. The Leverings became notorious in Omaha for a cycle that seemed unbreakable. Extreme poverty gripped the family. Homes were overcrowded, unstable, and often lacking basics like steady food or safety. Records show at least 20 children across the family were removed by authorities over the years due to neglect and abuse. Drug and alcohol abuse ran rampant. Many relatives cycled through arrests for theft, assault, and substance-related offenses. By the 1970s and 80s, 38 Levering descendants had racked up over 600 convictions in Omaha alone, from misdemeanors to felonies, costing taxpayers millions in incarceration. Nikko's aunts, uncles, and cousins were no strangers to jail. His uncle Merwin Levering escaped custody and hid in a doghouse after a violent arrest. His Aunt Ida had children taken away after they tested positive for cocaine at birth. His sister Erica, just a few years younger, would later join him in criminal headlines. This wasn't just bad luck, it was a generational trap, where kids grew up seeing violence as normal and survival as a fight. Nikko's own childhood was a battlefield from the start. Raised in North Omaha's tough neighborhoods, he faced physical abuse from multiple family members, including beatings that left lasting scars. Reports hint at sexual abuse too, though details are sparse in public records, enough to fuel lifelong trauma. Neglect was constant, with parents caught in their own chaos. Young Nikko often fended for himself. Mental health red flags waved early. By age 8 or 9, he saw his first psychiatrist at Omaha's Richard Young Center, but help was spotty. He later claimed voices started whispering to him around then, including the Egyptian serpent god Apophis, who he said commanded his actions. Was it untreated schizophrenia bubbling up, or the echo of a broken home? Doctors would diagnose him in prison with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and obsessive-compulsive tendencies, noting a family history of mental illness that likely amplified his struggles. School offered no escape. Nikko attended Highland Elementary, but trouble followed him there. At just 7 years old, in 1993, he shocked everyone by bringing a loaded .25 caliber handgun into class. He claimed Apophis told him to do it, but authorities saw a deeper crisis. That incident yanked him from his mother's custody, thrusting him into Nebraska's child welfare system, a maze of foster homes, group facilities, and instability that only deepened his rage. Education slipped away. He stopped attending regularly around age 11, bouncing between placements instead. He eventually earned a GED behind bars, but those lost years meant no stable learning, no positive mentors to steer him straight. Early signs of trouble escalated fast. By 11, Nikko admitted to 3 thefts, petty grabs that hinted at deeper desperation. At 12, in 1998, he was booted from a Papillion Group home after repeatedly assaulting other kids. One attack involved whipping a child with a clothes hanger, leaving marks. Months later, he landed back in Douglas County Youth Detention Center for slashing someone with a knife. Runaways became routine, violating probation and landing him in the Youth Rehabilitation and Treatment Center in Kearney by August 2001. Assaults piled up. At 13, he'd committed multiple violent acts. Then, at 15, came the big one: 2 armed carjackings. In one, he and accomplices, including family, used a stun gun on a woman at Westroads Mall, stealing her purse and vehicle. Convicted as a juvenile but tried as an adult for armed robbery, he got 21 years, though he'd serve only about 10.5 with time for assaults in prison. These experiences didn't just scar Nikko, they forged him into a ticking bomb. Growing up amid poverty's grind, where hunger and fear were daily companions, taught him that trust was rare and violence solved problems. Abuse and neglect eroded any sense of security, while the family's criminal web normalized breaking laws to survive. Mental health cries went unanswered, letting delusions take root. His father, whom he once threatened with a sawed-off shotgun, died in 2009 while Nikko was locked up, severing another fragile tie. Yet, as he navigated this chaos, whispers of something darker grew louder. Little did anyone know, release from prison in 2013 would unleash a nightmare no one saw coming. Nikko Jenkins walked out of the Nebraska State Penitentiary on July 30, 2013, a free man after serving more than a decade behind bars. But freedom came with dark shadows. During his time in prison, Jenkins had begged officials to keep him locked up or send him to a mental hospital. He warned them over and over, if released, he would kill. As far back as 2008, he told prison staff about his fantasies of random murders in suburban homes, comparing himself to a homicidal maniac. In 2010, while in county jail, he ranted about voices from an Egyptian god named Apophis commanding him to slaughter people: Catholics, whites, children, anyone. Doctors disagreed on his diagnosis. Some said it was schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. Others called it personality issues or fake symptoms. He refused meds often, carved words like Satan into his forehead, and even sliced his own throat and genitals in fits of rage. In March 2013, just months before release, he told a social worker he planned to kill people, eat their flesh, and drink their blood if set free. Requests for civil commitment to a psych ward went nowhere. Officials decided he wasn't sick enough for that. Instead, they let him go with a bus ticket to Omaha, no parole officer watching, and a vague plan for community counseling. What could go wrong when a man like that steps into the world unchecked? Back in Omaha, Jenkins didn't waste time. He moved in with family in the familiar North Side neighborhoods, surrounded by the same cycle of poverty and crime that had shaped him. His sister Nikko Jenkins and cousin Christine Bordeaux were close. They'd grown up in the chaos too. Within days, Jenkins got his hands on a shotgun, stolen or borrowed. Reports vary, but he was armed and ready. He later said Apophis was whispering louder than ever, demanding human sacrifices to prove his devotion. Was this delusion or a twisted excuse? Jenkins tattooed serpents on his skin, symbols of the ancient god of chaos. He confided in family about his urges, but instead of stopping him, some got pulled in. The stage was set for horror. By early August, the city was hot and tense, unaware that a storm was brewing. Jenkins, at 26, felt unstoppable. But who would be first in his path? The killing started on August 11, 2013, just 12 days after his release. It began with a cold setup. Jenkins, with help from Nikko and Christine, targeted 2 strangers, one Uribe Pena, a 24-year-old man out for a good time, and his friend Jorge Cajigaruiz, 29, both from South Omaha. The women posed as prostitutes, luring the men with promises of sex. They met near a park, but it was a trap. Jenkins hid in the shadows as the group drove to a quiet spot near 18th and Clark Streets in East Omaha, an industrial area with few eyes watching. Around 5 a.m., as the men sat in their white Ford pickup truck, Jenkins emerged. He blasted them with the shotgun at close range. Uribe Pena took shots to the head and chest. Cajigaruiz was hit in the head too. Blood splattered the cab. But Jenkins wasn't done. He dragged the bodies around, turning their pockets inside out to steal cash and make it look like a robbery gone wrong. In a gruesome twist, he mutilated them, carving symbols into their flesh and posing them in ritualistic ways, tributes to Apophis. The truck sat there, doors open, until a passerby spotted it later that morning. Police arrived to a scene of pure nightmare. Two young men, hard-working immigrants with families dreaming of better lives, reduced to lifeless forms in a pool of blood. Uribe Pena's sister later spoke of the heartbreak, how he was the family's rock, sending money home to Mexico. Kajiga Ruiz left behind grieving parents who couldn't fathom the senseless end. The community reeled, 2 lives snuffed out in an instant, families shattered forever. Why these men? Were they just unlucky, or did Jenkins see them as perfect offerings? Jenkins didn't stop to reflect. He melted back into the city, shotgun hidden, acting like nothing happened. For a week, he laid low, but the voices, he claimed, grew insistent. On August 19, 2013, he struck again, this time closer to home, literally. Curtis Bradford, 22, was someone Jenkins knew from prison. They'd crossed paths inside, and Bradford had just gotten out too. Jenkins lured him with talk of a job, maybe robbery or something shady. They met at an abandoned garage near 18th and Clark Streets, the same area as the first killings, like he was marking territory. Around midnight, as they stood in the dim light, Jenkins pulled out a .25 caliber handgun he'd acquired. He shot Bradford once in the back of the head, execution style. The body slumped to the ground. Again, Jenkins rifled through pockets, taking what little cash there was, and left Bradford face down in the dirt. Mutilation followed. He carved into the tongue, another serpent symbol, and posed the body grotesquely. Bradford's family was devastated. He was trying to turn his life around, dreaming of stability after prison. His mother wept publicly, asking how a supposed friend could betray him so brutally. The police found the body the next day, linking it vaguely to the double murder nearby, but no solid leads yet. Omaha buzzed with fear, 3 dead in 8 days, all shot, bodies desecrated. Was a serial killer loose? The tragic ripple: Bradford's young siblings lost a brother, his community another chance at redemption gone. But Jenkins pressed on, his rampage building. 2 days later, on August 21, 2013, he targeted a complete stranger, escalating the terror. Andrea Kruger, 33, was a hard-working mother of 3, driving home from her bartending shift around 2 a.m. She stopped at a red light at 168th and 4th Streets in West Omaha, far from the earlier scenes. Jenkins, cruising in a stolen Jeep Cherokee, taken earlier that night, pulled up. In a flash, he jumped out, yanked her from her silver Chevrolet Traverse SUV, and fired 4 times. Once in the head, 3 in the chest. She collapsed on the pavement, dying almost instantly. Jenkins sped off in her vehicle, leaving her body in the street. No mutilation this time, perhaps rushed, but the horror was the same. Kruger's husband found out hours later. Their kids, ages 5, 10, and 12, woke to a world without mom. She was the glue, funny, loving, always putting family first. Friends remembered her smile, but now it was gone, stolen in a random act of evil. The city panicked. This hit the suburbs, proving no one was safe. For murders in 10 days, all tied by ballistics later. The emotional toll? Unimaginable. Widowed spouses, orphaned kids, a community haunted by what-ifs. What drives a man to such destruction? After Kruger's murder, Jenkins ditched her SUV near 42nd and Center Streets, planning more chaos but spotting cops and bailing. He returned home, boasting to family about the killings, showing off stolen items. But cracks showed. On August 29th, he slashed his own throat in a supposed suicide attempt, landing in the hospital. There, he mumbled about Apophis and sacrifices. His sister Erica, horrified by his confessions, couldn't stay silent. On August 30th, 2013, she called police, tipping them off that Jenkins was the killer, hiding at their aunt's house on North 37th Street. Officers surrounded the place in a tense standoff. Jenkins, cornered, surrendered without a fight, walking out with hands up. In custody, he confessed, detailing the crimes as rituals to appease his god, preventing some apocalyptic event. Ballistics matched the weapons to all scenes. The arrest brought relief, but the tragedy lingered, for innocent lives lost, families forever broken. How did the system fail so badly, ignoring his pleas? What do you think? Could better mental health care have stopped this nightmare? Nikko Jenkins didn't bother with a clever alibi when the cops hauled him in on August 30th, 2013. Instead, he dove straight into a wild confession during a grueling 9-hour interrogation at the Omaha police station. Strapped to a chair, facing detectives who grilled him relentlessly, Jenkins spilled it all. He admitted to gunning down Juan Uribe Pena, Jorge Cajiga-Ruiz, Curtis Bradford, and Andrea Kruger. But here's the twist. He framed the murders as sacred rituals, commanded by the Egyptian serpent god Apophis. "The voices told me to sacrifice them," he rambled, describing how he posed bodies and carved symbols to appease this ancient deity. Detectives pressed him on details, like the shotgun blasts and the stolen vehicles, and Jenkins delivered, matching crime scene evidence perfectly. No denials. "No, it wasn't me." Just a chilling narrative laced with delusions. Was this a genuine break from reality, or a calculated ploy to dodge responsibility? The interrogation tapes, later played in court, left everyone wondering. His defense team latched onto that mental health angle right away. Jenkins' lawyers argued he was insane, unfit to stand trial, pointing to his long history of schizophrenia diagnoses and prison warnings about his violent urges. They filed motions for competency evaluations, delaying everything. Jenkins himself fueled the chaos. He showed up to early hearings with fresh, self-inflicted scars, including 666 carved upside down on his forehead, and outbursts where he claimed Apophis was controlling him. One psychologist testified that Jenkins was malingering, faking symptoms to manipulate the system, while others saw real psychosis amplified by years of untreated illness and solitary confinement. Prosecutors pushed back hard, presenting evidence from prison records where Jenkins had bragged about killings in letters and calls, showing calculation, not just madness. Ballistics from the recovered weapons, a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun and a .25 caliber handgun, tied him directly to the scenes, no room for doubt. His supposed alibi? Non-existent. Family members, including his sister Erica, had already turned on him, providing tips that led to his arrest. Erica's statements corroborated his confessions, describing how he boasted about the murders at home, showing off stolen items like Kruger's phone. Piece by piece, the insanity defense crumbled under expert scrutiny. Multiple evaluations in 2014 and 2015 deemed him competent, though barely. But would Jenkins stick to his story or crack under the pressure? The trial itself wasn't a drawn-out spectacle with a jury. Jenkins pleaded no contest to all 12 counts, including 4 first-degree murders, in February 2014, essentially admitting guilt without a full admission. This shifted focus to sentencing, but competency fights dragged it out for years. Key moments piled up in heated hearings. In November 2016, during a 3-judge panel's death penalty phase, Jenkins took the stand himself, a rare, explosive decision. Dressed in orange, he ranted for hours about Apophis demanding more blood, even threatening the judges if they didn't execute him. "I'm a monster created by the system," he yelled, blaming childhood abuse and prison isolation for his break. Victims' families testified too, their raw grief hanging in the air. Kruger's husband described the nightmare of telling their kid's mom was gone forever, while Bradford's mom begged for justice. Prosecutors hammered home the premeditation. Jenkins had lured victims, mutilated bodies, and evaded capture for days. Defense countered with family testimony about the Levering clan's generational trauma, arguing for life in prison over death. Tensions peaked when Jenkins disrupted proceedings, leading to restraints. The panel weighed it all, aggravating factors like the spree's brutality versus mitigating ones like his mental health. After months of deliberation, on May 30, 2017, they delivered the verdict: death by lethal injection for each murder, plus 450 to 500 years for weapons and robbery charges. Jenkins smirked in court, later saying he welcomed it. But appeals kicked in automatically, upholding the sentence in 2019 by the Nebraska Supreme Court. As of 2025, he's still on death row in Tecumseh, recently begging courts to drop appeals and execute him, while also claiming intellectual disability in new filings. Has his wish changed the game? His accomplices faced their own reckonings. Erica Jenkins, his sister and key player in the Bradford murder, she admitted shooting him first before Nikko finished the job, was convicted of first-degree murder in 2015 and sentenced to life, without parole. She got an extra 20 to 40 years in 2019 for assaulting her cousin in prison. Cousin Christine Bordeaux, who helped lure the first two victims as bait, pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit robbery and was sentenced to 20 years in 2016. Their fates sealed the family's dark chapter, but questions linger. Could earlier intervention have spared everyone this horror? Now, let's turn to Nikko Jenkins' life behind bars on death row, a place where time stretches out in isolation and the shadow of his crimes hangs heavy. Since his sentencing in May 2017, Jenkins has been housed at the Tecumseh State Correctional Institution in southeast Nebraska, a maximum security prison that holds the state's small death row population, about a dozen men in total. Death row here means a life of strict routine and solitude, far from the chaos he unleashed on Omaha. Inmates like him spend up to 23 hours a day in single cells, about 8 by 10 feet, with a bed, toilet, sink, and a small desk. Meals slide through a slot in the door, and recreation time is limited to an hour or so in a caged outdoor area or indoor gym, often alone or with minimal contact. Showers happen a few times a week, and visits are non-contact, through glass. The environment is stark: concrete walls, constant fluorescent lights, and the distant echoes of other inmates. It's designed for control, but for someone with Jenkins' history, it amplifies the inner turmoil. Jenkins' behavior in prison has been a mix of defiance, self-destruction, and unpredictability, raising questions about how much his mental illness drives him. From the start, even before his death sentence, he was known for extreme acts. During his trial, he carved symbols into his skin, like 666 on his forehead, upside down so it read right in a mirror, and sliced his throat and genitals, landing in the hospital multiple times. These weren't one-offs. Records show at least 3 suicide attempts since his arrest. In March 2019, guards found him unresponsive after he slashed his throat deeply enough to need resuscitation by paramedics. His lawyer called it non-life-threatening but serious, and it put him back in the medical ward. Officials were baffled how he kept getting razors or sharp objects, despite high security. As recently as 2025, court hearings have highlighted his worsening mental state: hallucinations, voices from Apophis still commanding him, and behaviors that suggest deep psychosis. Doctors note he often refuses medication, cycling through episodes of ranting, self-harm, and withdrawal. Has this isolation helped or hurt? Some argue solitary confinement, which he's endured for years, only fuels his delusions, turning a troubled mind into something more fractured. Interactions with guards and other inmates are kept to a minimum on death row, but Jenkins' past shows a pattern of volatility. Before his 2013 release, while serving time for carjacking, he assaulted fellow prisoners and staff, adding years to his sentence. At his grandmother's funeral in 2009, he and his sister Erica attacked a corrections officer after being uncuffed briefly, leading to more charges. On death row, reports are scarcer, but he's filed lawsuits against the prison system, claiming neglect of his mental health needs, like in 2014, when he sued for $24.5 million over his early release, blaming officials for ignoring his warnings. Guards describe him as manipulative at times, using his claims of divine orders to unsettle them, but also quiet during routines. No major incidents with other death row inmates have surfaced, likely because they're segregated. Yet, his outbursts in court, speaking in tongues, howling, or threatening judges, hint at how he might test those around him. It's a heavy burden for staff, dealing with a man who sees himself as a vessel for an ancient god, not just a prisoner. As for remorse, it's hard to spot any in Jenkins' words or actions. He has never expressed regret for the 4 lives he took, instead framing them as necessary sacrifices to Apophis, the Egyptian serpent deity of chaos he worships obsessively. Tattoos of serpents cover his body, and in prison letters and hearings, he boasts about protecting this kingdom with brutality. Religion, or his twisted version of it, dominates his mindset. No shift to Christianity or redemption stories here. Instead, he clings to these beliefs, even using them in appeals to argue insanity. Speaking of appeals, they've dragged on. The Nebraska Supreme Court upheld his death sentences in 2019, and the U.S. Supreme Court denied review in 2020. But Jenkins has flip-flopped. In March 2025, he handwritten a motion begging to drop all appeals and set an execution date, saying he no longer wanted to fight. By April, in a Tecumseh courtroom, he changed course, pushing to continue challenges. Then, in September 2025, he filed claiming intellectual disability. His old IQ score of 68 might qualify him for exemption under law. And by October, his lawyers argued for a new evaluation, noting no IQ test in over a decade and his declining mental health. As of late 2025, no execution date is set. Nebraska hasn't carried one out since 1997 due to drug shortages and legal hurdles. Jenkins spends his days, from what records show, writing letters to courts and media, perhaps reading or reflecting in his cell, but always under the weight of his isolation and illness. In the end, Jenkins' story leaves a somber mark, a man trapped in a cycle of violence, mental torment, and a system that couldn't contain him until it was too late. But was justice truly served in a state where death row means endless waiting? Or does his untreated madness point to bigger failures in how we handle the severely ill? What do you think? Should intellectual disability spare him the needle, even after such horrors? Drop your thoughts below, and if this gripped you, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into true crime's darkest corners.